Okay. So who's that? Oh, look at all this. The elevator delivered. Fantastic. Okay. It's a beautiful day. The world needs options. Because the world doesn't see any way out of this. We just got to keep doing what we're doing, and it's going to take us where it's going to take us, and there's nothing we can do about it, is what the world is saying. But we know, because we are architects, we know that we have choices. The world has choices. So, what the world needs from us, the architects, is access to those choices. We produce the possibilities that promise to untangle the web that feels like our destiny. If things keep going the way they're going, it's not going to be good. The world needs a sense of hope. The world needs some choices, some options that produces better outcomes. You read what you read. You read the sketch writing, I hope, of your classmates. Now, oh, also someone paid $250,000 for your education. We have 2 hours. What do you want to get out of it? Let's hit the target question board. Just in case you have trouble reading it, and for those of you at home, the target questions are, and I still don't know if you can see this. I bet you can't. Can you see this at home? Can you see the whiteboard?
No, we can only see the presentation.
Okay. I'll figure it out next summer. How to use this room, if I ever use this room again. Okay. The target questions that we have so far is, why do we study the distant past? Who cares, right? How to plan a housing system to work at small and large scales. And we altered that to say how to plan a anything system, fill in the blank, to work at small and large scales simultaneously. How can we design to produce better outcomes for ecological balance against the forces of the automobile system, of the cultural system that favors single-family houses, of the resource economy that artificially keeps resources subsidized and low cost, so there's no economic incentive to be ecologically, to design for a better outcome of ecological balance. So how do we design against these powerful forces to produce outcomes of better ecological balance? How to design to fulfill the potential embedded in the idea of a community? How can we design more inclusively so that the benefits aren't constantly being sucked like a giant jet engine powered vacuum cleaner? All the benefits suck right up to the top, the wealthiest 1%. What are the greatest obstacles to designing what we know is the right outcome? How can we remake the city to strike a more beneficial ecological balance? How do we shift the narrative away from automobilism? I think we made up that term. Do we know what we mean by automobilism? classism, racism, sexism, automobilism. You get it? It's a bias in favor of the driver. And this is the one that strikes terror in my heart. What are the greatest obstacles to designing what we know is right? My fear is that this education, this class, and your training, this excellent training that Wentworth is offering, it's a bargain at $250,000, is a giant bait and switch scam. We tell you, we arm you with the knowledge of what it takes to solve these problems. And then you graduate into a world only to discover that there is no possibility of ever doing any of it because of these other things, right? I hate this question. Damn this question, right? So these are really powerful questions that the 8 o'clock group came up with. What do you guys have? And they didn't word it exactly this way. I took some artistic license in offering suggestions. So let's hear it first from our audience members from home. Let's hear the Zoom group. What do you got for takeaway questions, target questions? There's still some room on this board.
I mean, you kind of mentioned one of the questions already that are similar to mine, and I kind of referred back to like, how do we plan within like small and large scale?
Yes. Got that. Any others?
So in the reading, I realized that towns were separated into sections of class. Towns themselves were even like just streets apart for the difference between the rich and the poor.
Mm-hmm.
But now classes are more divided by the towns themselves. So we have a really wealthy town and then a really poor town.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that distinction now town versus town instead of like street versus street like it used to be?
Mm-hmm.
Like what changed?
And even remember the section cut through the Paris Boulevard, that apartment. You have wealthy on the second floor, and the wealthiest 19% on the next floor up, and then the most impoverished at the very top. So it can split into the scale of the building. Well, that's horrible. But we would look at that as like, well, if you make a nice lobby for the richest residents of the house, everybody benefits. That's a cross subsidy. By serving the needs of the wealthiest, you are, just because of the spatial arrangement of the architecture, everyone's benefiting. Now let's move up to the scale of the town. If you have a wealthy street and the next street over, it's not so wealthy, and the next street over, it's not wealthy at all. All the kids are going to the same school system. In this hypothetical model. And so the parents in the parent-teacher organization of the wealthy families say, we want 8th grade algebra. We want a makerspace in our school. We want uniforms for our football team and our cheerleaders, right? To be, and as those wealthy members of the PTA advocate for a better school experience for their children of privilege, everyone benefits because it's a mixed population in the school. But then now you segregate by town, now you don't get that. And now in the town where I grew up, the police were stationed at Route 1, Boston Post Road. And when someone in a car came over the town line who was not white, they would pull him over We heard it on the police scan. And so they can't even drive through the town, much less enjoy the improvement of the lobby or the school system. So
Yeah. So
that's
why
the
is-
question.
What changed?
What changed?
Yeah, like why is it now on such a larger scale when it used to be on a much smaller scale?
Yeah. And how do we get it back? Exclusion. So this is kind of an extension of this one. How can we design for inclusion in the context of so much exclusion, of the context of the increasing scale of exclusion? And we know what we mean because we just went into it in great depth, right?
To kind of go along with that question, the section that I had read, it kind of talked about like the geological and natural elements that kind of shaped Chicago. And so I thought like another question could kind of going up to the question, how do we plan small and large scales regarding the division between like those geological and natural elements and how that kind of shaped the city to what it is today?
So how would you state that as a question?
I guess it's kind of similar to the other one, but how do we plan small and large scale regarding to the division between geological and natural elements? If that makes sense? I don't know.
The geological and geographical conditions that you're referring to are relevant to the task of extracting wealth. Right? The grid that stretched across the continent was a grid of extraction of wealth, first in land speculation, then lumber, then agriculture, then cattle. And it's a system, a giant landscape scale system for extracting wealth, sucking it into Chicago, and then distributing it out through the Great Lakes, the canals, the railways, out to the rest of the world as processed products. And so the question might be, how do these continent scale systems of extraction operate? How can they operate? How can systems of large systems of extraction operate at all scales, large and small, with greater benefits, a more favorable distribution of benefits? Is that okay?
Yeah.
So it's not just exploitation at every level. It's actually the benefits are more fairly shared. Okay, other questions? Yes.
Okay, so bear with me while I explain
That's
how
what
I
I
got to
did.
my question.
That's what I did.
But I was kind of thinking about, say, 10 years ago, if the number of homeless people in the United States or just communities that are low income housing, just poverty in general. And then thinking to now, those numbers. I want to know if that, if we have solved that issue or if we have started to hide the issue.
It makes sense.
Yeah, are we building to hide an issue or to solve?
So that's kind of a history question. And the answer is yes.
To which one? Yes, we're hiding.
To all of them. Things are worse now than they were 10 years ago.
Okay, see, I would have thought the opposite.
Right. It looks pretty good.
Right.
Right. But in the United States, Well, in the world, things are better. But in the United States, things are worse, significantly worse. So things are getting worse. And a lot of the investment, a lot of the efforts of architects and their clients are to conceal and concentrate those conditions. And a little bit towards developing solutions. But this is an example of the chilling question. What if we know what is right, but we can't do it? Oh no. Puts things in perspective. At least it didn't go on my laptop. Are you gonna get something? Well, look at you, so resourceful.
They're dry.
No, it's okay. Are they dry? They won't be dry for long. There's a lot of moisture here. Yeah, why don't you go get some water? Thank you. So it puts things in perspective. My biggest problem is my coffee, right? But at the other end of the spectrum, this is one of those tricks, those sick jokes that the world plays on us. We spend $250,000 in the 4 or 5 best years of our lives figuring out the solutions, only to encounter a world that refuses to do what we know is right. So we know how to feed the world. We know how to reduce prison populations. We know how to reduce homelessness. We know how to push back the carbon content of the atmosphere. We know how to solve all these problems, but we're not going to let you do it. Stop it. We're not going to let you do it. How do you overcome those obstacles that prevent us from doing what we know is the right solution? So it's not enough to know the solutions. You have to know what are the pinch points, what are the points of entry that allow us to unlock these forces and actually implement these things. It's not enough to be a good designer. You have to design strategies of implementation to make them come into the world. You have to understand the operating system of the world sufficiently to actually implement these ideas. That's why Wentworth is in the coming years is likely to add a real estate development major. And we're likely to encourage architects to minor in real estate development, because that's where the solutions happen. Is when you find a way to satisfy the profit motive and solve problems at the same time, that's the only way you move forward. That's the biggest obstacle. The economic system is the biggest obstacle to doing what's right. So let's start a real estate major. Who's with me? So good question. Did we get it? What did we write down?
You said it's a history question.
Yeah, it's a history question. I'm just answering it. But it brings us back to this question.
I guess, are we designing to solve a problem or
Well, it's like, thank you so much. A lot of effort is going into hiding the problem, but that's kind of depressing. That's kind of like, we're going to see a slide with the slave ship again. Remember the slave ship slide? It's kind of like designing a slightly more humane slave ship, a slightly better prison. You know, I worked hard all day. I come home from work and I'm having a beer, and maybe I'm having one too many because I'm depressed as hell, because what did I do with my $250,000 investment in my education? Sure, I'm paying off my student loans, but what did I just do? I made a slightly more humane prison. Depressing. I concealed the homelessness rather than actually making life better for those without a home.
So that's kind of like what Do you think that's what's going on with behind us? With these low-income housing? Still a section of low-income housing, but
That's a section of low-income housing.
yeah,
That is housing. Half of them are subsidized, half of them are not. When Susie gets off the school bus, she walks home. She's not ashamed to live there.
right.
No one knows if her family is living in a subsidized unit or not. It looks the same.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's what
that's
I'm
a
saying.
solution. That's
Okay.
good.
That's a good.
It's bad architecture, but it's a good operating system. Let's give it better architecture.
So what do you consider hiding? Like, what do you mean by
See,
the US is hiding?
I would consider that. So, low income.
Well, it's a Band-Aid on the system. The fundamental problem that we know, if you are paying attention, the median income, throughout history, as the median income goes up, housing costs go with it, right? As the median income, which means, right, the middle household, the household, if there are 100 households and you ranked them in the order of wealth, the middle one, number 50, what's their income? As that median income goes up, the rents and housing costs can go up with it, and it's about 30% historically of what their income is. And if every once in a while, if instead it goes up like this, economists always knew that it would go back because market forces. You can't charge more than people can afford, right? Just supply and demand. The prices will go down until people can afford it. But what happens when you wake up one day in a world where all of a sudden people are paying 50% of their income, or 60% of their income, or 70% of their income in some cities? What's going on? How is that even possible? Why did the laws of supply and demand, what's broken about the laws of supply and demand? The answer is Dubai. Is that there are investors who are purchasing homes and renting them as an investment property, and supply is not keeping up with demand. And so this market failure of supply not to meet demand produces homelessness. It's just the numbers. So that's the major failure. Even this is up against the forces of financialization. There's only so much this can do. That said, this is what success looks like in our world. Until we put some guardrails on financial investment in housing, this is going to continue. Sorry, your housing, you're going to be commuting a lot further. For all this automobility thing, you're kind of posed. You're going to be driving a long way to get to work. Sorry, it's because of that. What else? We should get on to the lecture. Unless you have another target question. So the larger perspective of the course, it's crazy. Here we are, we ran out of time and we've got 4 topics to cover today. It's crazy, right? Actually, it's not that. Typically, and I said this last week, typically a course like this, the professor thinks what they have to say is so important. So we talk about Gobeleki Tepe, the electrician suggested we talked about this morning. And we start the semester and we're talking about cities from the first cities from 10,000 years ago, 8,000 years ago. Then we go to Greece and we talk about Greece for a whole week. And we talk about Rome for another week. It's like, oh my God, are we ever going to get to anything that might have an impact on my career, is what you might say. And the answer is no. We get to about this part of the semester and we're talking about the Athens Charter, the thing we talked about last week. And the Athens Charter, which kind of took over the world in the 1960s when your parents were being born. What was the global population? It was about 3 billion. Right? What is it now?
7, 8.
7, 8. Right? So what if the entire course we focus on up to this moment, and then in the last class we have to cover all this stuff all in one class? That is what typically has been happening in classes like this. That's how my class was. We didn't really talk about informal settlements when I took this course, even though they were taking over the world. And so we're doing it the opposite. The distant past has less to offer us for many reasons than the recent past. So this is a sign of success. Here we are at the end of the semester, and we're cramming 4 topics, 4 weeks of content into 1 week. Sorry, and you're welcome. This is what success looks like in the 21st century. We don't care about this old stuff, except to the extent that it helps us address these questions. Is there anything that this old stuff has to offer us to address these questions? Let's find out. Let's close the laptops, unless you're taking notes, not notes. Who's taking notes? Who's not taking notes? You taking notes? You taking notes? Okay. You at home? I see you. Close those. No, don't close the laptops. You have to keep your Zoom open. Okay. So the other thing that we're doing today in relationship to the history of this class. So what's the history of this class? The most important book on cities for architects in the 20th century is Jane Jacobs' like Great American Cities. What's the second most important book for architects on cities? Kevin Lynch, Image of the City. Kevin Lynch taught this course at MIT for a decade or so, and he handed it over to Julian Weinert, who taught it to me and a bunch of your faculty. And if your studio instructors didn't take this course from Julian at MIT, they probably took this course from someone who took Julian's course. It's just such a powerful landmark in teaching of this topic. Rather than hand the course over to his rising student, he burned the course to the ground and ended it so that it could never be taught again. But in the meantime, those of us who took the course have been teaching it all over the world. And some of us have been more aggressive about altering the course. But here's something that remains the same as it ever was, the same as when Kevin Lynch taught the course, is these 3 topics. City as a cosmos, the city as a machine, and the city as an organism. And then I'm adding, instead of looking at the Industrial Revolution, it's really capitalism. Because this is the largest single force and that's why we talk about real estate development. Capitalism is the operating system of the planet within the space of your career practice. You are entering the operating system of capitalism. Capitalism is not in and of itself evil. Capitalism is a very complex set of rules and systems that are very powerful. They can be channeled into positive outcomes, or they can be allowed to just run wild and positive, negative, we don't care as long as we make money, right? So right now, the operating system of capitalism is geared to maximize what? Money. And is money goods and services? Yes, it is. But isn't money also bads and disservices? You can educate a child, or you can wage a war. You can buy a book, or you can buy a gun. Right? So capitalism, in and of itself, if allowed to run wild, does a poor job of distinguishing between goods and bads, between services and disservices. But capitalism has succeeded in part because we rewrite the rules of the operating system to favor goods. Goods are good, and bads are, what's the word? Bad. And if we can distinguish between goods and bads, services and disservices, capitalism can actually be a really positive force for change. Capitalism has already been a really positive force of change. Notice how long your grandparents have lived. Notice how long can you expect to live? Who's going to live to be 100? 90. Who's going to live to 90? No? Not? Yes. Let's live, right? Congratulations. Capitalism did that. The health system, the building codes that created hygiene, that all happened within a capitalist operating system. Capitalism can do wonderful things very quickly, very powerfully. But it doesn't happen on its own. We need rules. We need the design of better rules. And those rules are not just rules that float in the air. They are rules that are embedded in the built environment. So the design of better rules is something we need architects to do. We need architects to help us design better rules. So what can we learn from the distant past that can help us design better rules? Let's start at the beginning. The city as a cosmological model, as a machine for producing an order within the cosmos. And then let's move from the cosmos to skip over machine, go to organism, come back to machine, which brings us straight into capitalism. Okay, you ready? Strap in. Here we go. So the operating system that produced the world that you are inheriting has something to do with population, which is being tracked down here. We hit 1 billion back there. We're about to hit 2 billion. Here we go. Ready, set. Boom, 2 million, 2 billion. Right? And then around 1960, 3 billion. Look at it, we're hockey sticking up. And all of this is happening within an operating system that is producing cities, infrastructures, and these cities and infrastructures are being produced as instruments of wealth extraction from the resources of the planet. The Amazon, is that the Amazon? No. The forests are being cut. Chicago, the forests are being cut. The prairie is being harvested. The cattle are going to slaughter. The Amazon is being deforested in order to create cattle ranches. That's why hamburgers are so cheap. If McDonald's, if we didn't subsidize the extraction of wealth from the Amazon, a McDonald's hamburger would cost $30 just for the water expense. Systems of distribution around the planet. Africa is the next big resource race to who can extract the most fastest. The operating system of the world goes something like this. The rules are simple. Whoever extracts the most, the fastest, and dumps the most into the environment the fastest, gets the most money. If we were running a gamed scenario simulation on a computer, we would say, okay, those are the rules. Okay, everybody, you ready to play? Any questions? Those are the rules. Ready, set, go. This is what it would happen. The world would be overwhelmed with resource extraction and dumping of waste to the point where the system would collapse, even to the point where the human species would die off and disappear. We can't help ourselves. We have to destroy the planet. We have to kill our own species. We're just playing by the rules. When you listen to the news, it's just different versions of that outcome. We have no choice. We have to destroy the planet. What else can we do? We have to drive to work. What else can we do? The bus system stinks. It's all different versions of exactly the same thing. The rules of the game have been written, and without changing those rules, there's no other outcome. So that's where these questions come from. It's a beautiful day. The world needs alternatives to keeping the same rules just year after year, month after month, week after week, day after day. And so what can we learn by looking back? Well, if we look back, you would think that nothing would change because it's history, right? This map has been the same since you were in elementary school, right? The spread of human species from the Great Rift Valley in Africa 200,000 years ago across Europe, and then down here, and then across the Pacific. Same map, right? No. About 20 years ago, this number was changed from 8,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago. Fast forward to now, this map is showing 20 to 15,000 years ago. But this is out of date. We now know that people crossed the Bering Strait about 25,000 years ago. When you were in elementary school, they said, ooh, the original indigenous inhabitants of the Americas numbered about 5 million. No, we now think it was 20 or 25 million people when Columbus arrived. And we now know that about 95% of them were killed by either directly by warfare, genocide, or most of them by diseases, unfamiliar diseases. So we know this world of history is changing constantly. As a matter of fact, a month ago, these guys published a book. It's called The Dawn of Everything. And they point out the fallacy of teleological development. That for forever, we've been telling the story that humans evolve, go from stages. We go from stage 1 to stage 2, stage 2 to stage 3, and we get more and more advanced every stage.
So just seeing a book like this kind of reminded me. So earlier you were talking about how this class, we don't look at the old stuff as much, and we're kind of focused on more modern stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All of the readings that we did
Mm-hmm.
all seem pretty old and talk about things that are very old.
Yeah.
Why do we use those readings instead of using more? Are there more modern readings that people have written?
When they occur, we put them into the course. But once someone's written, like William Cronin's Nature's Metropolis was published in 1995. That came out of nowhere, and it changed everything. And no one has written, it's a very difficult kind of thing to produce. This is a very difficult kind of thing to produce. It's very rare that people are able to produce these kinds of things. So this is monumental. Thomas Piketty's Capitalism in the 21st Century, monumental. We don't expect anyone to write something like this anytime soon, in the coming decades. Thomas Piketty's work, no one's going to pass that one. Richard Rothstein might be one of the most revolutionary recent things was The Color of Law. That was published in 2017. It's so monumental, it's unlikely to be surpassed. And then it's true of William Cronin's Nature's Metropolis, 1995. When someone writes something more useful for you, hopefully I'll notice it. Maybe you'll tell me about it 6 years from now. You'll send me a message on WhatsApp and you'll say, hey, you might be interested in this book. It's more recent. It deals with some of the ideas of William Cronin's Nature's Metropolis, but it's more up to date. So, yeah, every year I say, oh my God, the same readings. I can't do that. I need a new reading, but there's nothing. So I work very hard to give you the best readings. These are the best readings. When did Friedrich Engels write the chapter Great Towns? 1834. It's still the best. I mean, the language is a little old. No one has written anything since that's as compact and gets to the heart of the matter. Right? So one of the things people are noticing is that when you look back in history, if we had a time machine and we could go back in history, go back to any point in time, you would immediately know what time and place it is because of the technology. Technology has changed so tremendously that no one ever imagined 100 years ago. Your grandparents would live, or that you would live to be 100. It was unimaginable. It was impossible to believe that that was possible. And so the thing that has changed in every moment in human history is the technology. But what hasn't changed? The human systems. And that's what these guys are pointing out, is that the questions we ask today, should the minority white male voters of the United States have more power than everyone else? Some would say yes. Others would say no. One person, one vote. And that's the same debate as 1,000 years ago, as 10,000 years ago. It's boring. It's the same old debate. Who has the right to access power and privilege? Should it be widely distributed or should it be carefully controlled? Same question at every stage of human history. So these guys are looking at that. They're pointing out that we do not go through step-by-step advancement. The clearest example is like Africa. Africa has to first go through agricultural stages of development. Then it has to go through the Industrial Revolution. Then it has to use import substitution, enter into the information age, and then catch up with us. But it's never going to catch up. Africa's never going to catch up. This is the developmental model that is the poster child of the teleological fallacy. Teleology means step by step. You can't skip steps. You have to go through steps. It's an idea that is an instrument of oppression between nations and societies. And so these guys are just pointing out that there is no step by step. Every age has choices. We can actually, what this does, it gives us access to looking back in history and looking at the choices, the options that were available, the choices of operating system that were available to ancient societies, and they could go one way or the other. We can go one way or the other. We have choices. There's no destiny. We're not destined to repeat the mistakes. So when you go to Bali, and I hope you do, you'll notice these temples. scattered around the fields. These little shrines, I guess. And then every once in a while you see a temple. But these are not ancient artifacts of some lost race. There's fresh flowers in the offerings placed on these shrines. There's even a stick of incense that's still smoking. There's a little curl of smoke coming up from the incense stick. Someone made this offering this morning, and they lit the incense stick a few hours ago. What's going on here? Some ancient ritual has continued to the present. Is it for tourists? No. Do they even know why they do this, or are they just doing it because they're stuck in some ancient oppressive system? Well, both. They are stuck in an ancient oppressive system. It's the women of Bali who spend 3 or 4 hours a day producing these offerings and laying them out. It's a huge effort. But it also turns out to be a complex adaptive system. It is exactly the kind of thing that solves the crisis of the Anthropocene. And no one knew it existed until we broke it and the system collapsed, causing starvation and death. In the 1980s, the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, the international aid industrial complex brought new strains of rice, new pesticides, new fertilizers throughout Asia. It came to Bali, where this huge population has been fed for over 1,000 years by these practices of the religious balance between water and the gods. And when the first year of the Green Revolution, scientific methods, the rice yields went up. The second year, instead of 2 crops of rice, they got 3 crops of rice. Some would say that's a 50% increase. The third year, up again, things are looking great. The fourth year, starts to falter a little bit. Fifth year, the production went down. 6, 7, and 8, collapse. Massive starvation, death. They quickly canceled everything. No more pesticides, no more fertilizers, no more green breeds of rice. They went back to the system. And I was recovering in a village from typhoid, and a bunch of computer scientists from California were nearby. I started talking to them. Turns out they're telling me about this. And it turns out they were there to study using computer game theory modeling to see if they could understand how these ancient religious practices produced this complex adaptive system. And through their modeling, and then years later, I forgot all about it. Years later, I see this book and then another book about this study, how when they do their computer modeling, they can disrupt the system. They can have drought one year, they can have crises of other kinds every year, but the system always returns to an optimal productivity stage. So it turns out that the religious system of giving offerings and trusting the priests to dictate the timing of the rice planting, the sharing of resources up and down the system, that is a complex adaptive system that restores optimal conditions for maximum rice production. If it were the United States, what would happen? If all the water's coming from the sacred lake underneath the active volcano, going through a system of tunnels and coming down through the rice terraces of South Central Bali, what would happen if it were the United States? Joe.
Someone would dam the water itself.
That's right. The wealthy people would take, the companies would take control of the water uphill. They would sell the rights. They would exercise. They would do what they have to do because of the rules of the game. They would establish a monopoly control of the water. Google, Amazon, Apple. They would control the prices to the point where the wealthy could access the water at the top of the system, and the poor people would be displaced to the bottom of the system, near the beach in Kuta, great surfing. But all the poor people would end up down there, and in a drought year, they would die in higher numbers than the people upstream. And the whole system would support fewer people. So wealth would be hoarded up at the top of the system, literally and socially, and a lot more people would do without. But somehow, that's not what happens. No, it's very rare on the planet to find so many people being supported by such a limited set of resources. If we could understand how this balance is produced, we could maybe come up with an operating system that could operate at all scales with more favorable outcomes for more people, that could operate at small and large scales, that would produce better outcomes for ecological balance. So here's an operating system that comes from over 1,000 years ago that we only recently learned about because we broke it. And then we had to figure out what it was that we broke. And the latest book is this one that tries to extend this idea of complexity, which is what architects do. When someone asks you what architects do, the answer is we manage complexity. Have you seen a set of construction documents? We are the best there is when it comes to managing complexity. You can see the details of the tile work in the bathroom in the same drawing that you can calculate the square footage of the flooring. Right? It operates at small and large scales, the details and the larger systems in aggregate. What you're doing in Studio 6 is you are becoming the masters of complexity. Congratulations. What are you going to do with those powers? Maybe read this book and figure out how complexity, the tools of managing complexity that architects are being armed with, can actually be harnessed to answer some of these questions. Sound good? So after that, we don't really need to study anything else, right? There's the Chinese system. In terms of the cosmos, there's the Chinese operating system that operates. The Chinese city is not just a reflection, a passive reflection of the Chinese religious system. It is an instrument for maintaining the balance of spiritual forces, of light and dark, of benefits and threats. It is an instrument of control. Same with the Hindu city. The mandala, the hierarchy of the mandala of the Hindu religion is embedded in the cities. The cities are instruments of managing the forces of the universe, both supernatural and social on the ground. The different castes are restricted in where they can be in the city, and the relationships between different groups is carefully controlled using the instrument of the city, not always in positive ways, but it's a clear example. And bizarrely enough, I understand this very directly from my experience. When I graduated from Cooper Union, I had a great 3 years of internships in New York and San Francisco, and then recession hit, and everyone was being laid off. And instead of waiting to be laid off, I took the licensing exam and did everything except for the interview that was part of the California licensing system. So I missed that because I accepted a 3-month grant to go based on this photograph that a friend of mine took. A friend of mine took this photograph, showed it to me, and I said, wow, what's going on here? this like very dense city, this building that is also a gateway, and beyond it, this lush garden. She said, yeah, there's a mansion set in all these gardens. And I said, oh my God, why did I study Italian for a year? Why have I been focusing on Rome? I need to reshift my resources. I need to apply for a grant to go here. I'd never been anywhere but Canada and the Caribbean. But I applied for this grant, I learned Indonesian, a crash course. I arrived at this gate, bleary-eyed. I walked through the gate and I slept in it because you could. Next morning I came out to start my 3-month grant period. And I talking to the guy sitting in here, and I say, what's going on with this gate? He said, oh yeah, gate. It's called the Elephant Gate, not because there were really elephants, but because it's so big, there could be elephants. But maybe there were elephants, we don't know. It's the Elephant Gate into this mansion, this noble's house. It's a miniature version of the palace. I said, what, palace? This palace? He said, yeah, go down the street, turn right, ask where the palace is. So I go down the street, turn right, ask where the palace is, and I ended up in front of the palace here. So I started out over here. Here. So I went around. So I end up here, and I'm talking to the guard. And while we're talking, they'd say, yeah, it's a palace, but it's really run down. It's an old palace. And then someone gets out of a car and he goes like this. And I said, what was that? What did you just do? He said, oh, I was just greeting the princess. Princess? I said, yeah, there's 36 princes and princesses. 36? And he said, yeah, king, 6 wives, 36 princes and princesses, palace at the center of a royal city. And they still have lots of ceremonies, but they have no money. So long story short, I extended my stay from 3 months. It ended up being 4 years, and I basically was the royal architect for the king of Java. And what I discovered was all these rituals that were being performed to keep, it's a classic Hindu city that is not just a passive reflection of the religious beliefs, but also an instrument of maintaining the balance between the forces of heaven and earth. All good forces flow to the earth from heaven through this building. This is the belly button. This is the umbilical cord of good fortune. It flows down to the planet, and it goes out in concentric circles. And so if you're out here, no big deal, you can speak low Javanese. But as soon as you live closer to the center, you have to be able to speak high Javanese. And if you ever come in here, you have to speak the language level above high Javanese because the king has its own vocabulary. You can't say, have you eaten yet to the king? You use the same word eat that you use for everyone else in high Javanese. The king has his own word for eat. So it's very complex. You can't wear shoes. You can't sit in a chair. You can't walk in certain places. The rules are all spatially organized, like the caste system of the Hindu city. Does this sound familiar, Athena? Do you have this in where your parents, where did your parents grow up? And does any of this sound familiar from stories they've told? I would ask them. Ask them a question next time you see them. So this is the diagram of the religious system. The diagram is translated through mandalas, through this diagram. It manifests in this rectilinear palace configuration of concentric rings of power, with the highest level at the umbilical cord, the belly button here, and going out in concentric rings. And so when there's an imbalance in the universe, such as what happened, the center in the 1980s, a fire swept through and burned down the center of the palace. The king must have been a jerk. He must have done something wrong. The gods were displeased. The fire swept through the palace, destroyed everything except for the royal library. Thank God, because that's where I spent most of my days doing my research, in the royal library. And the engineer from the Indonesian government showed up, and his job was to rebuild the palace as quickly as possible using concrete, because that's the quickest, cheapest way to do it. But when he arrived, he found, wait, there's still active spiritual religious practices. Let's not break the system the way they did in Bali. Let's follow the rules so we don't displease the gods. So sacred trees, they're the 4 pillars at the center of the palace. One came from the forest of the north, one came from the south, east, and west. Before you cut the tree, you've got to give it offerings, and the priest meditates there day and night for days and days and days until the gods indicate, okay, you can have the tree. Every day the priest says, can I have the tree? And the forest says, no, can't have the tree. Next day, can I have the tree? No, you can't have the tree. Eventually, there's enough offerings, enough meditation, enough whatever. The tree says, okay, you can have the tree. There's the princess cutting down the tree. It's going to take her a long time, right? I suspect a chainsaw comes soon. And it's fashioned into the columns. The king is nailing a gold nail into the base of one of the 4 sacred columns at the center. And off we go. No time for all these stories, but basically everything is a complex system of animism, Hinduism, Islam, all lumped together in this mishmash of religious practices that are being maintained, and as the physical palace itself collapses under its own weight, because there's no money for anything but the ceremonies. So my job was to raise money. And so we raised money, and we measured and drew. We performed sacred ceremonies, and then we rebuilt parts of the palace. This is the priest, Asmo, who is also an architect, who's also a builder. So he's a priest, architect, builder. He has to be a priest to perform all the necessary spiritual ceremonies in order to design and build the palace. And so here he is wearing the symbol to the Queen of the South Seas, that he's a friend of the king's, so please don't strike me dead. I'm here in this sacred space. Everyone has to wear those. And it culminated in, after 4 years, in a ceremony for the Aga Khan Award for Architecture. You've heard of it? Every 3 years, the Aga Khan Award of Architecture. It's better than the Pritzker. Look it up. Actually, I've mentioned it. The archive of the Aga Khan Award for Architecture is an excellent place to get projects for analysis. It's very carefully curated. His Highness the Aga Khan went to Harvard, loved architecture, always wanted to be an architect, and so in the 70s he established this award, which continues to the present. It's a big deal every year. You might have seen it, the award announcement on the Urbanism WhatsApp. Anyway, that's the King of Java, His Royal Highness the King of Java, His Highness the Aga Khan, and I'm the translator going between English and Indonesian for their conversation during the ceremony. So, long story short, this is kind of the starting point in my education, my awareness, that when is a building more than just a building? A building is more than just a building when it is an instrument for the functioning of an operating system. And the operating system here is the balance between heaven and earth. And it's no less true in other operating systems. There are other operating systems like Islam, which is the topic of the next thing, which is the city as an organism. Let's see, where are we? Okay. Any questions? So the idea here is what we can learn from the ancient past is we can see how architecture functions, how architecture performs as an instrument at the center of operating systems other than our current operating system. We're so familiar with our current operating system. We're so embedded in the operating system of our lifetimes that we don't even see it. We don't see that it's an optional operating system, that this is only it's only one version of the capitalist operating system. We've actually, if you just go back 10 years, there's a totally different version of the operating system that we call capitalism. And there are multiple different versions of the operating system of capitalism that are operating simultaneously right now that we can choose from. We can choose variations of this operating system. And it's really hard to see the operating system within which we function on a day-to-day basis until you step out of our operating system and explore the possibilities of other operating systems. We couldn't understand the dysfunctional aspect of the Green Revolution operating system until it broke the Balinese agricultural system and it forced us to look at it and understand it. We can't understand how capitalism operates as an option until we step out of capitalism and look at what the king of Java is doing in his palace. This one, we're going to look first at things like this. If the rules at the core of capitalism are overly simplistic and it leads to some negative consequences, how do we change those rules? What is the relationship between the set of rules and built outcomes? Here's a few simple laws of physics, of hydrodynamics, of water. Here's with a few simple rules of the way water flows. It results in this form, this pattern that emerges out of those simple rules. It's an extremely complex built outcome that emerges from a very simple set of rules. Have you seen these videos on YouTube? These swallows that swoop and soar. Have you seen those? That the rules at play is that each swallow, I'm pointing at that one, you see that one? Each swallow is operating on a rule that says, if my neighbor to the left moves 2 inches towards me, I move away, but only 1.5 inches. And then the one next to me is going to follow those same rules. If I come 1.5 inches towards the next one, I'm going to move away, whatever 75%. Who knows? But if with those simple rules emerges this very complex flow of swallows. So it looks like chaos, but at the core of the chaos are a few simple rules of hydrodynamics, a few simple rules of swallow behavior. And understanding those rules results in some great possibilities for designers. You know what this is? Do you know this? But you've seen this stuff? Have you taken a class with Rob Trumbull? He's a big fan. So this is the work of Andrew Goldsworthy. Basically, he goes for walks. And at some point in the walk, he sits down and he observes things. In this case, he observed icicles along a river. In this case, he observed sticks. And he uses the rules that he encounters in his observations. He extends those rules. He operates according to those rules. And by extending those simple rules, he produces these beautiful outcomes, these built outcomes that are a manifestation of the simple rules governing things like ice and water and sticks and leaves and rocks and color and everything. It's just remarkable. What if we as architects proceeded according to this strategy? We look at the world, we observe the rules embedded in our ecological systems, and we use those rules as the basis for our interventions. Then some of these things actually start to take place. We start to address, we produce better outcomes for ecological balance. We remake the city to strike a more beneficial ecological balance. So a lot of these things start to open up as possibilities when you take this approach. So what other things that appear to be completely chaotic to us can we look at that reveal an underlying order that can be the basis of great things? So this is where, in a more generously spaced set of topics, we would go deep into the Islamic city. But basically, the punchline of this is what first appears to be absolute chaos, quickly reveals itself as being the outcome of a few simple forces. The ones that jump out is there are roads that probably existed prior to the settlement. So a few major roads. And then as the settlements grew up around them, there's these other things like, what's this? This is a change in the pattern. You see this? You see that? It's like a different texture. What is that? What else do you see? There's also you see the courtyards? See the pattern of courtyards?
Middle.
Yeah, in the middle of every building, there's a dark spot. And as I color it in, I'm depriving you of access to the evidence. Sorry about that. But you can see that these are all courtyard houses. What's up with that? What's up with this? So it turns out that what at first struck us as being complete chaos is actually the emergent design outcome of a few simple rules embedded at the core of the religion of Islam. And it comes to us from the Quran, which is the Bible, the Islamic holy book, and a series of Islamic court cases and outcomes that establish the rights to privacy, especially, of mobility, and it's really the outcome of a long history, over 1,000 years of history of legal judgments. So at the core of these cities are a few simple rules embedded in the religion of Islam, that we pray 5 times a day, we face Mecca, and so our mosques are designed to face Mecca. And so you can see the mosques in the urban form because they're twisted. And there's always, in relationship to the mosque, there's always a school and there's always a marketplace. So there's an urban form that is dictated by the simple rules of Islam as embedded in the Quran and the history of judicial cases. And so every year, Klaus Herdeg would take his students from Colombia to go to one of these cities and draw these cities as a way of understanding. And you see again, like Weldon, the work of Weldon Priest, in the courses he taught at Wentworth, we see again the background, the context moves into the background by the use of line weight. But it gives us enough context so that we see the courtyard structure of all the houses. We know this is a residential fabric. We know that every house has a street or an alley that goes to it this way.
So it seems like a lot of these buildings are designed with more culture in mind, culture and religion, how they use the building. And you said that, I mean, a lot of these buildings are older. You said that things have progressively gotten worse, at least in the US, in terms of solving all these issues that we're going to be solving. How were they able to fit in cultural design and functionality and solving all of these problems then? And then now we can't even solve the problems. Forget about culture.
First of all, I think things have gotten, mostly things have gotten better.
Okay.
Let me just be clear. We live longer. More people have access to greater opportunities than ever before in human history. Things are going pretty damn well, but not nearly well enough. We should be doing so much better than we are. And that's, I'm comfortable with that position. The United States is where the greatest opportunities lie, and things are better here than in most other countries in the world. But it should be so much better than it is, and we're so close to reaching that better situation. That's the frustrating thing. It's never been better than it is now. I mean, look at the computers I have in my pocket. I mean, it's insane how the opportunities that are available to us, but it should be so much better. When we go back and we see the relationship between architectural design and cultures, and now I'm skipping that middle thing, architectural design, systems, operating systems, and the cultural values and norms of the religion of Islam. Once you look at that and you see it, what we hope happens is then you come away from that experience and you see those eyes, see the look in my eye? You see that? Right? Okay, everyone get that look in their eye. This is the look in your eye that you get when you finally see architectural design in relationship to operating systems and cultural norms and values. Okay. Oh, right. Okay, now I turn from the screen and I look out the window, and what do I see? I still have that look in mind. Right? Oh, architectural design in relationship to operating systems, in relationship to the norms and values of culture. Before I had this experience, if you had asked me, does America have a culture? Does America have a culture? Riley says no. Does America have a culture?
Of course. Yeah. I think so.
But it's invisible to us. Right? It's just normal. What do you mean? Am I speaking with an accent? No. I speak without an accent. Hear me. Look, I don't have an accent, right? Raise your hand if I'm speaking with an accent. Okay. So most of you say I'm not speaking with an accent. But from the time I spent a few weeks ago in Barcelona, the other people speaking English didn't sound anything like me. And from the time I spent in Colombia, the other people who spoke English, they didn't sound at all like me. From the time I spent in Indonesia, I had the most ridiculous American accent. People, I would speak and they would laugh at me. They'd say, "Ooh, before you climb the volcano, bring your jumper. It's chilly up there. Bring your jumper." Jumper? I said, "Yeah, jumper. What do you call it? Sweater." Right? That's what I'd say. Sweater. Right? I sound ridiculous. I have such a stupid accent. I have to apologize everywhere. Right? Same thing. You look out the window and all of a sudden, oh my God, this world is absolutely encoded with the operating systems of the United States and the norms and values that tell us that success is manifested as a colonial style home. Right? Look at that. The culture is embedded in the architectural project. The culture of automobilism is embedded in the built environment. Racism, sexism, pepper spray tests. It's dripping with these cultural norms and values that I had no idea. It's all invisible to me until I had spent enough time looking outside of my comfort zone. And I couldn't see it until I saw it here. And now all of a sudden I can see it everywhere. It's like the Matrix. It's like the red pill, is what I hope you experience. Are you experiencing the red pill? Okay. Is that a cultural reference that's familiar to you? The Matrix? The Matrix. You've seen the Matrix? Red pill? Blue pill?
There's like a whole I don't know how to explain it, but there's like a weird ideology like kind of centers around like the idea of like the red pill. That's kind of like gonna become a thing on the internet.
Oh, there is?
Like red pill theory. It's weird. It's kind of like more like the I don't know how to explain it, like your side of the internet. Like
Count me in. No, I'm not sure I want to endorse any of that.
it's more like Alex Jones side.
Oh,
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Alex Jones. Okay, so architectural project, operating system of Islam, cultural norms and values of privacy. One of the students at the course years ago said, "Oh, Islamic cities? I come from an Islamic city. I come from Kuwait City. Let me present my house." And so he gave this presentation on Kuwait City, where his house was produced at a moment when they were trying to modernize. They were trying to be modern. So instead of facing inward to protect the privacy of the household, they wanted to be modern. And so they put a required 2-meter setback. How big is 2 meters? 6 feet. So they required a 2-meter setback to be more like a single family house in the United States. They wanted to be modern. So they have cars, they park in the garage around back, they have a setback, they have windows that face out. And so all of a sudden the house has to get smaller because you have the setbacks. And there's no courtyard in the middle, everything's looking out. But in Islam, you're not allowed to look out a window and into your neighbors, so you have to coordinate the window location. Oh my God, what a nightmare. It turned out to be horrible. What a horrible waste of space. And so they quickly eliminated that and went back to the courtyard structure that is compliant with the norms and values of the culture of Islam. which is privacy matters. I'm not going to look into your window. Don't you look into my window, right? I'm going to look into my household's courtyard inwardly. And so it's the opposite of the single family house model of the United States because of the culture of Islam, the norms and values of Islam, in order to support the operating system of privacy. All the houses are the same height. People sleep on the rooftop, and friends don't let friends look out from their rooftop onto someone else's lower rooftop. That would be rude. It's against the building codes of Islam. This is an architectural fabric that is the product of the operating system of Islam, reflecting the norms and values of the culture.
I find it kind of interesting too how like it seems like these norms that have like centered around Islam have also like adapted to like the climate like in the area too.
Absolutely.
To provide like access to like passive like cooling or like,
Exactly.
courtyard just like sun shading.
Exactly.
Do they still like, I would assume still have windows on the perimeter of the building?
No,
All interior?
all interior.
Well, I
So
don't
this
even,
is the, well,
Here's
here's some on the exterior, but the norm is blank walls on the outside. They go up against each other. So it's, and we used to do on sophomore year, studio project, this would be a courtyard house in Egypt where the houses are like this. This is, and the windows are here. There are no windows here.
but are there any windows facing the street front?
Yeah, very small. And so would be the street to come in to the courtyard. And that's one option.
So those courtyards offer enough. Does enough sun really get down into the courtyard?
How much sun do you want when you live in Kuwait City? Thanks, but no thanks, right? Deflected light is my favorite light. Like in studio, what happens if you're sitting along the southern side of the windows? The more light, the better, right? So why are you putting those cardboard, why are the windows blocked? Are they blocked? Often the windows are blocked because it's so damn hot when you're sitting in the sun. It's not, friends don't let friends sit in the sun. Okay, enough of Islam, right? It did what it needed to do. It's just another example of opening our eyes to actually see the operating systems embedded in our world. So let's move on to the operating system that is embedded in our world. The city is a machine for facilitating the extraction of wealth within the operating system of capitalism. The Greeks did it. They used the grid to expand their influence. Then the Romans did it. They used it to expand let's go back to this. The soldiers are called centurions. And they centurion. They say, here's the center point of the camp that will become the city. And they plot out the Cardo east-west road and the Decumanus north-south street of the center of the city. They use the human scale ability to sightline past these two strings to project a grid onto the surface of the planet. That's them centuriating. And they lay out the camp that then becomes the city, surrounded by walls. When you get to the gate, there are 4 gates. When you get to the gate, you head off to the next town. And so remember that geometry so that you can see it. The grid is a powerful machine for rapid expansion. It's like a modular house. You design it once, and then you push a copy and paste, and you have 10 houses. No, 100 houses. No, 10,000 houses. No, you have millions of houses simply by pushing the copy and paste. It all fits on the grid. Grid is a powerful thing. It can keep going until it hits water or a cliff. So the outline of the Greek city is determined by topographic features, but within the boundaries, it's all grid all the time. It's a powerful mechanism for reproduction of a system. And so we look at the Roman world and we see at the center of every city in the Mediterranean world, we see the Roman settlement, the walls. And then when you get to the gate, you head out to the next village. And so you can see the Roman city at the center of every city in the Roman world. Let's look at Florence. You see the Roman center? Is that what you saw? There's Brunelleschi's Il Duomo, the Cathedral of Florence that you studied extensively in History Theory 1. Now, once people start settling outside the wall, they say, hey, what are we, chopped liver? Don't we deserve our own defensive wall? Boom, they get their defensive wall. And you see it in the city of Florence today. And et cetera, it happens again. They get their defensive wall, they get their defensive wall. And that was the final one prior to the arrival of the railway system. There's the train station in the city of Florence. I hope you see it soon. And so the Roman grid is across the continent. We did it in Manhattan. We did it across the United States. Step one, remove the Native Americans. Step two, put a grid on the surface. Why is this road crooked? This is a vivid example of the reversal of the usual relationship between the map and the territory. We think of the map maker showing up on site saying, okay, there's a mountain, mountain. There's a river, river. There's a valley with a city, valley with a city. The map is a passive reflection of the reality of the territory. This is the opposite. The map was drawn in Baltimore or in Washington, D.C. Thomas Jefferson proposed the grid. When he was president, he said, let's do the grid west of the Appalachians. In the 19th century, that grid was laid out. It became the basis for conquering the continent. And we read about this. Who did Nature's Metropolis? Step one, remove the Native Americans. Step two, lay out the grid. The grid allows you to buy and sell the property from the market hall in Baltimore or New York. You could sell millions of dollars worth of land without ever visiting it because every lot is exactly like every other lot. When you're trying to lay out a grid across the surface of the continent, what happens? Have you ever given gift wrapped a basketball? What happens when you try to put a basketball under the Christmas tree?
Can't wrap it well.
Yeah, it's so sloppy.
Well, it's the same thing you should just show with the Greece map, or was it Greece?
Yeah.
But the grid just doesn't interact well with the natural boundary.
What's going on here? Why would the grid not be a perfect grid? Why doesn't it look like this?
Because it's projected on a globe.
Yes, thank you. The soccer ball, the basketball doesn't allow you to put wrapping paper around it without crinkling the paper. And so you get these intersections that are the crinkling of the paper, where the roads have to take these corners, and a lot of people die as they fall asleep. Why would there be a T intersection on this road? It just goes due north forever. Why would I have to stop and turn? because of the crinkling of the wrapping paper. The planet is not flat. The United States is so big, the grid covering the United States is so massive that the curvature of the Earth forces us to create these corrections to the grid. Pretty cool, huh? So this is an example of the landscape is the outcome of map making. It looks the way it looks because the map makers are imposing an order on the landscape. We don't care if there's a mountain. We don't care if there's a river. We don't care if there's an earlier settlement of Los Angeles. We have to impose our grid because of the logic of capitalism requires us to rapidly reproduce things. So Chicago, as we read in Cronin's Nature's Metropolis, shows us what happens. Here's the Brooklyn Bridge in the background, the tallest building in the world, 1885. And the march of railways across the continent. The angel of progress is draping the telegraph wires as the stagecoach, these settlers drive out the darkness beyond the Rocky Mountains and into the Pacific Ocean, along with those Native American savages. We drive them across and civilize the planet for wealth extraction, first from the forests, then using that forest to create fences to extract wealth across the United States. And Chicago becomes the machine for extracting that wealth. The grid of Chicago allows speculators to buy parcel for $10 in the morning, sell it for $100 by the end of the day, and make fortunes between 1833 and 1836 until the market collapses. But the system carries on. It covers the Midwest, the land rush. The grid allows for the rapid, just as it did for the Romans. The grid across the United States allows for the rapid settling of this landscape. The railway system we talked about before, and the scale shift from the architecture of the factory, the grid of power shafts, first driven by water wheels and then by steam power, the sectional grid of power distribution within the factory is replicated. If we move from the architectural scale of the factory building, we move out to, after people visit the 1893 World Columbian Exposition, the white city that launched the City Beautiful movement, they go to the slaughterhouse and the stockyards of Chicago, where the grid is laid out in Chicago. The railway system delivers cattle to the stockyards. The cattle are slaughtered, and then the railway delivers the refrigerated meats to the cities of the East Coast. And so this is a demonstration of this grid of power that is not just the factory building, but it's also the city of Chicago, but it's also the entire landscape of the United States is a giant gridded machine for resource extraction from the landscape into Chicago and then distribution back out. The animals would walk under their own power to the top of the slaughterhouse. They'd be attached to the wheel, and the weight of their carcasses would drive the machinery of the slaughterhouse. The smell would be horrible, but people would visit. This was as popular as the World Columbian Exposition. And this was the basis for this relationship between the project, the system, the culture, that is the operating system of capitalism. If you don't open your eyes to the larger system forces, you're at risk of being an architect who is designing a slightly more humane slave ship. Remember that example? And so This is another pass through colonial history, where in the Spanish Americas or the Dutch and English, Africa and Asia, the architecture is an instrument for wealth extraction. And it brings us to the topic of the Industrial Revolution in England, producing the conditions that Engels is writing about in 1834, reading some of you read. And what prevents these conditions from prevailing today? It's building codes. So even within the system of extractive capitalism, there are certain guardrails that are installed to prevent capitalism from just running wild. We established building codes to prevent preventable disease and death from starvation, from overcrowding, from diseases. And so we have more hygienic industrial cities because of those building codes. And the housing reforms that we saw in New York City, that we've looked at with the redesign of the tenement, you only have to design it once because it fits in that standard 25 by 100 foot parcel. That is every parcel in New York City. And so you improve the one building and then you replicate it throughout the city. And that's how you create a city of health and hygiene, where previously a lot of people died unnecessarily. And then you get this, where the further improvements, once the tenements of the Lower East Side are built out around 1900, then in the 20th century, according to the ideas of the Radiant City, you build these new housing developments that eliminate space of the street. And it's basically what you see at Alice Haywood Taylor, apartments across the street. And we've connected to the present. Now, the thing we care most about as we move from this into the analysis is moving from the architectural project to larger system effects. How does the project catalyze change at the larger scale? Have you taken a class with Sam Maddox? Yeah. He came out of the Rural Studio in Auburn University in Alabama. I think in the first lecture of the semester, we saw a film clip of Samuel Mockbee, who was the architect, who said, these architecture students need to come out. I should probably insert that here, just to remind you what he said. He said, architecture students who are working on abstract problems in the studio are so disconnected with reality. In contrast, our students, they go out to the villages and towns of Alabama, where they actually meet the people who can benefit the most from their design skills. And they design beautiful houses at very low cost for these real people, and then they build them. And by the time the course is over, they've built a house for a family that previously had nothing. And they did that year after year after year for over a decade. And they built over 100 buildings. Amazing, right? When Samuel Mockbee died, and the next group of architectural faculty inherited the course, they said, yeah, that's great. Project, project, project is fine. But look at the world. If we do project, 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 what is that going to get us? It's going to get us a few projects. Where's the system change? To answer their own question, they said, here's the system change. We're going to design a housing type. We're going to design another housing type. We're going to design multiple housing types. And then we're going to design a system of finance and we're going to engage the forces of the state of Alabama. They have funding to improve the housing situation of the citizens of the state. We're going to ride that wave, and we're going to build a project and then push the repeat button, and it's going to become 1,000 projects. It's going to become 1,000 more. It's going to become 1,000 more. Pretty soon, you're not doing project. You're doing system change. This is what we want to see in this week's analysis. When is an architecture more than just architecture? When it is a catalyst for system change. Where are those projects? One of the things that have been identified is that capitalism is good at supplying luxury single-family dwellings. That's what the contractors and the developers all want to build. So that's where the money is. The operating system of capitalism favors this housing. But this housing is for the nuclear family of the 1950s and the post-war period, when nuclear families made up 70 or 80% of households. What's the current percentage of American households that are nuclear families? 2 parents, 2 adults, and 1 or 2 or 3 kids. What percentage of the American household count? Make a guess. We have no time. 19%. But it's still the lion's share of all housing production is here. And no wonder housing prices are way out of pace of what people can afford. Because we're not building the middle housing solutions that matches the demand. This is a market failure. The operating system of capitalism is failing to keep up with housing demand. It's such an enormous scale. What are architects doing to filling in that missing middle housing? And that is a term. I'm not sure if I shared the book, but I think it's called the missing middle. What are, part of it is design, but it's not all design. It's also the institutional arrangements. Just like in Mississippi, they tapped into state funding. Here, the city of Cambridge has done an affordable housing overlay zoning that you have to follow the zoning unless you're developing affordable housing. Then you can build anything you want, basically. I'm simplifying. But towns are now embracing that system change. Even in a single family zone, you can build this if you're building for affordability. What are the best examples of that spatial, formal, institutional arrangement? What is the design part of it, and how does it fit into that institutional arrangement? We'd love to see analysis examples of that. Questions? Ooh, we're 3 minutes overtime. Wow, that was a lot. Thank you for bearing with me. Is that too much? Are you okay? Is everyone okay? Is everyone at home okay?
Yes.
Okay. So try looking at the world with those eyes. Remember those eyes. Take that red pill. You too. Thanks for all your questions, Joe.
Of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I think Laura and Gabe talked to you. were the editors for
Get it ready?
the sketch writing?
They didn't say anything.
Oh, they didn't?
No.
Oh, okay.
I don't think.
We were just so lost. I mean, not lost.
Uh-huh.
We kind of had an idea of like what to do,
Uh-huh.
but we were very confused because we saw the previous sketch writings, but it's like there were things that we thought other people did wrong, and we never really talked about it, like what is expected
For editors?
for editors. Like there's no document, nothing talking about it.
Yeah.
So we just don't know if what we did was right.
Do you think what you did was right? Did you add value to the sketch writing?
So I was fixing other people things, but then they told me that no, we're supposed to comment and let them know what to do, like so they can fix it.
Both are good.
So it's like, okay, so we can either fix it or just leave notes.
Yes,
Got it.
both are good.
Because I was fixing for like most of the time, and then they told me we're just supposed to leave notes. So I was just like, okay.